It's not open. The challenge of fentanyl is one that has been escalating for more than 5 years.
Look, you cited a figure that was 50,000, and since you came in, it's been more than double every year. Who's responsible for that? Is it you and your policies, or is it President Biden? It's a simple thing. You don't want to answer it because you know it's you. You know it's your policies you're driving in. On October 27, 2021, you issued guidance that restricted the ability of ICE officers to arrest aliens in protected areas such as courthouses where they knew aliens to be. You thus made it more difficult and dangerous for ICE officers to go and enforce the law. These are people who had already had, and generally, many of them have already had their day in court. Did President Biden order you to issue that guidance?
Congressman, our policies are driven to protect the American people.
Who issued that policy? Was it the president? Are you following the president, or did you create the policy?
Congressman,
or will you ever give us an answer?
That is a policy.
Yield back. Disgusting.
Mr. Chairman,
gentleman from
I have a unanimous consent to enter into the record
data.
Thank you. Data from the U.S. Sentencing Commission, which shows that 88% of the people convicted for fentanyl trafficking crimes are United States citizens, not immigrants crossing the border.
Without objection. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Secretary, welcome to the committee. It's wonderful to see you. You and I served together in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles now some 30 years ago. I had great admiration and respect for your integrity and your work ethic then, and I do today. And I'm grateful for you taking on what may be the most difficult job in the U.S. government today. So thank you for being here. My colleagues have a lot of questions for you, but they don't seem to want to give you the time to answer them. I'd like to ask you about the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. In 2016, the Russians intervened heavily in our election to try to elect Donald Trump. They intervened with a massive social media campaign run out of St. Petersburg. They intervened by hacking the Democratic Party and its emails and releasing them through cutouts. In 2020, the Cybersecurity Agency, having learned from the experience in 2016, I think did an admirable job in protecting our elections infrastructure. Its primary sin, although the Republicans won't say it, is that its then director asserted after the election that it was the most secure election in our history. That was the sin of the agency, doing its job and doing it well. As we look forward to the next presidential election, I want to ask you about what you see as the threats to our elections infrastructure, or the threats of misinformation, disinformation from whatever source. I'm particularly concerned about YouTube's recent decision. I think, the Republican badgering has had an effect, and this is part of the effect. YouTube recently decided to, quote, stop removing content that advances false claims that widespread fraud, errors, or glitches occurred in the 2020 and other past U.S. presidential elections. So YouTube has now decided it's not going to remove content it knows to be false. Other social media platforms like Twitter have decided to fire those that would be in the business of security or looking for misinformation, disinformation campaigns from whatever sources. So in light of that changed environment, what do you see as the principal threats to our elections in 2024?
Congressman, I would identify at least 3 threat streams. One is the threat of disinformation propagated by the nation states of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. 2 would be the cybersecurity threat, something that we are always vigilant in guarding against. And it is because of that threat that we seek to build redundancies in our election systems to best protect them. And 3rd is something that we saw manifested last year, and that is the threat of physical intimidation of individuals at the voting booth. Those are 3 threat streams that I can identify right off the bat. We are very focused on each of them. Of course, the physical security is not something that we ourselves provide, but work in collaboration with local jurisdictions and give them advice as to how they can best secure the facility. and the integrity of the voting process.
Today, you may have seen it was reported that Rudy Giuliani has acknowledged in a court filing that the statements he was making about these Georgia election workers were just patently false. Those election workers' lives were put at great risk. Some of your own personnel, their lives have been put at great risk by those who would attack our elections or attack efforts to prevent misinformation and disinformation. What efforts can you make to protect election workers and your own staff from these relentless falsehoods advanced to facilitate the campaigns of some of my colleagues, presidential hopeful?
Some of the things that we do, Congressman, is we provide information to state, local, tribal, territorial, and campus law enforcement with respect to the threat streams that we are observing. We also have protective security advisors in each state that give advice to local communities about how best to secure facilities and make them safe areas for people to vote. Those are two examples of the work that we perform.
Well, I appreciate what you do, Mr. Secretary, and I hope that these constant and unfounded attacks on you, on your agency, on the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency don't make your work that much more difficult. We're grateful to you, and with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I want to issue a quick correction here. As we start, it was mentioned earlier that Congress has not acted in decades in regards to securing the border. This House of Representatives in this session of Congress did act. We passed H.R. 2 to secure the border. How many Afghans, Mr. Secretary, have been admitted to the United States through parole since the fall of Kabul? 2 years ago.
Congressman, I would be pleased to provide you with that data. I don't have it.
There were 70,192 Afghans that were brought into the United States. They were brought here on parole for 2 years. Will you be reviewing each individual status on a case-by-case basis as this expiration happens?
Congressman, you're referring to what we termed Operation Allies Welcome, a program that we are very proud of, that we instituted to provide refuge for individuals, many of whom...
Will you be reviewing those they came in on parole, will you be reviewing them on a case-by-case basis?
We reviewed them on a case-by-case basis, and when those parole periods are subject to renewal, we will do so.
The commander down at Fort McCoy in my state, when I interviewed him 2 years ago, he said they were not interviewed on a case-by-case basis. In fact, in the terror hotbed of the world, Afghanistan, which should have a special immigrant visa process, previous administration used that to make sure to fully vet. Not one of those people that came in from Afghanistan were sent through the special immigrant visa process. They were simply given parole. Do you know how much damage was done to Fort McCoy during that period when those 12,000 plus Afghans came in?
Congressman, the individuals who were benefited from Operation Allies Welcome were indeed screened and vetted by government personnel.
They were brought in categorical parole, Mr. Chairman. There was $145.6 million of damage that was done to Fort McCoy. Did you realize that?
Congressman, we're very
The place was virtually destroyed. I want to move on. A poster behind me. We are seeing all sorts of very serious criminal threats that come from across the border. That was 2 weeks ago from FBI Director Wray. In other words, saying the border is out of control. You say it's under control. Who's lying, you or FBI Director Wray?
Congressman, we are very proud of our efforts to secure the border. We are relentless in our efforts to strengthen.
FBI Director Wray said it's becoming more and more of a priority for us, under oath, just 2 weeks ago. Who's lying to us? Director Wray or you?
Congressman, we work very closely with the FBI to ensure the safety and security of the American people. That is our highest priority.
to illegal border crossings? Do you, the increased fentanyl is not tied to illegal border crossings? Do you agree with that statement?
No, it's not effectively managed right now. And until it is, the cartels are they're the winners of this.
Cartels are the winners. Sheriff Mark Daniels, under questioning here a few months ago before this committee, Cochise County down on the border of Arizona, he said the open border has led to a significant increase in the amount of fentanyl coming into this country. Do you agree with his assessment?
Congressman, we have taken it to the cartels.
Do you agree with his assessment? He said the amount of fentanyl has went up significantly as a result of the open borders policy implemented by this administration January 20th of 2021. Is he lying to us? Did Sheriff Daniels lie to us?
Congressman, I respectfully disagree with Sheriff Daniels, whom I know well.
So Sheriff Daniels is lying to us?
That is not what I said, Congressman, and let me...
Someone's not telling the truth here, Mr. Secretary. Someone's not telling the truth. It's either Daniels or it's you.
Congressman, we have interdicted more fentanyl at the ports of entry than in the prior administration.
Mr. Chairman, I'll go to close here. The most urgent lethal threat in America was in this man's testimony. There's one person in America who can reduce the number of fentanyl deaths in America. And by the way, the term fentanyl overdoses is used. That's not the case anymore, is it? It's fentanyl poisonings. We've had them here, the Rackwall family from my state of Wisconsin. When you hear of fentanyl poisonings here in America, there's one person that can do something about it, and he sits right before us today. You, sir, are responsible for reducing fentanyl deaths in America. Will you ever do anything about it? I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman, I got a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman from Louisiana.
Two things, actually. Wanted to enter into the record a report, a Fox News report, April 27, 2022, which details the testimony of Mr. Mayorkas. They created the Disinformation Governance Board within DHS to combat alleged disinformation and misinformation, terms that he's not able to explain here. And the second document is the public statement on the Hunter Biden emails with the 51 former intel agents that has now been debunked, but they also refer to misinformation. So it's an important term. Enter those into the record.
Without objection, the chair now recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan. The House Judiciary Committee is responsible for helping to ensure the rule of law. Unfortunately, the chair of this committee ignored a bipartisan congressional subpoena. The actions of the chair have undermined the credibility of all congressional committees in seeking information from witnesses and damage the rule of law. Now, Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for your public service. I'd like to discuss with you the history of the southern border. In September 1969, a few years before Watergate consumed this presidential administration, the president launched Operation Intercept, which basically shut down the southern border. Less than 3 weeks later, that operation was stopped because it largely failed to address the issues at the border. Secretary Mayorkas, who was the Republican president in 1969?
Congressman, I have to think back sequentially in reverse chronology, but I'm sure you know the answer immediately.
I'll give you a hint. This Republican president resigned.
Congressman, I know the president, President Nixon.
Thank you. After Nixon resigned in 1974, his vice president became president. But the issues at the border continued, and in 1976, the president stated, quote, 80 to 90% of the heroin that comes in the United States today comes across from our southern border, end quote. Secretary Mayorkas, who was the Republican president in 1976? The vice president to Nixon.
I'm sorry?
He was the vice president to Richard Nixon.
Gerald Ford, are you
Yes,
speaking
that's
of?
correct.
Yeah,
And
Congressman, I'd prefer not to answer questions of history right now. My focus is on the work.
I'm going to help you with
Homeland
it.
Security.
I'm going to help you with this. In the 1980s, the Republican president had promised morning in America again. But the issues at the southern border continued, prompting him to order a partial shutdown of the border in 1985. This operation, aptly named Operation Intercept 2, was stopped after only a few days because it also failed to address the issues at the border. And this was a president that knew about these issues because he was a former governor of California. Secretary Mayorkas, who was the Republican president in 1985?
Ronald Reagan,
Thank you.
Congressman.
The border issues continued into this century. In 2006, the president, who was also familiar with the border because he was a former governor of Texas, declared that, quote, for decades, the United States has not been in complete control of its borders, end quote. Secretary Mayorkas, who was the Republican president in 2006?
President Bush,
Okay.
Congressman.
In the prior administration, the Republican president tried to solve their issues at the border, and he failed. I would now like to show a video of what was actually happening during the prior administration in 2018. Staff, you can play the
This is a
video.
pit stop on a punishing journey to the U.S. border, and it's still just the beginning. Migrants from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador continue to make their way north, fleeing poverty, persecution, and gang violence. The caravan now includes an estimated 7,200 migrants, and more are expected to join tomorrow, potentially pushing the number past 10,000.
In May 2019, the situation got even worse. Politico published an article on June 5th, 2019, that was titled, Border Arrests Rose to Nearly 133,000 in May as the border surge continues. Secretary Mayorkas, who was the Republican president in 2018 and 2019?
President Trump, Congressman.
And now we're here in 2023. Secretary Mayorkas, last month in June, border crossings declined to the lowest level in over 2 years, correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat
Border crossings last month declined to the lowest level in over 2 years, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Politico published an article last week that stated approximately 99,545 individuals were apprehended last month, the first time the figure dropped below 100,000 in more than 2 years. That data is largely correct, right?
I believe so, yes.
All right. So based on the facts that you testified to, here's this chart. Shows that under Trump, there were 133,000 border apprehensions in May 2019, and last month, under the Biden administration, there were less than 100,000 border apprehensions. The facts show the southern border is doing better last month than it was under Trump in May 2019. Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas, for your public service. And now the Republicans want to impeach you. Good luck with that one. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I thank the chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, on April 28th, 2022, I ask you, quote, will you testify under oath right now? Do we have operational control, yes or no? End quote. You responded with, quote, yes, we do, period, end quote. I then asked, we have operational control of the borders? You responded, quote, yes, we do, period, end quote. Followed up, I said, I read to you the definition of operational control. I actually held up this chart, operational control as defined under the Secure Fence Act. Put it up for plain reading, plain as day. I put up the second part of the same statute, which defines operational control. Means the prevention of all unlawful entries in the United States, including entries by terrorists, other unlawful aliens, instruments of terrorism, narcotics, and other contraband. I said to you, do you stand by in your testimony that we have operational control in light of this definition? You responded with, quote, I do, period, end quote. Earlier, you testified I didn't give you a chance to finish. Yet you specifically, when asked and held up a statute defining exactly what operational control meant under the Secure Fence Act, you said, quote, I do. I believe that was purposeful. I believe you want the American people to believe we have operational control of the border when we very clearly do not. Less than a month later, in Homeland Security, you testified, quote, under that strict definition, this country has never had operational control. This year, House Homeland Security, then Border Patrol Chief Raul Ortiz testified before the Homeland Committee that DHS did not have operational control of the border, either by the statutory definition or not. Now, that is an honest answer. In the Senate Judiciary Committee, shortly thereafter, you testified, with respect to the definition of operational control, I do not use the definition that appears in the Secure Fence Act. And the Secure Fence Act provides statutorily that operational control is defined as preventing all unlawful entries in the United States, and by that definition, no administration has ever had operational control. If you will recall, when you testified here in front of me when I asked that question, when you very clearly stated we do have operational control, when presented with the actual definition of operational control, you didn't hesitate. You said, I do. And you, in fact, then referred back and said, I believe that my predecessors would have said the same thing. I asked Chad Wolf that question in this room. And Chad said, well, no, we didn't use that framing to say we have operational control. We're striving to achieve operational control. But you didn't do that. You looked straight at the American people, straight at me, straight at every person on this committee, and said, we have operational control. Why?
Congressman, 2 points. One, you did not let me complete my answer. Two,
hold on. Or give me your second point. Go ahead.
Thank you. Two, the Secure Fence Act defines operational control as not a single individual crosses the border.
I'm aware. I read it, and I read it to you, and you read it, and in fact, you said, I do. You didn't hesitate. You didn't say, I do. I need to explain what I mean by I do. You said, I do, over and over again. And here's the problem with that. This is a pattern. Did you lie another time when you said on September 24th, 2021 at a press conference, quote, we know that those images painfully conjured up the worst elements of our nation's ongoing battle against systemic racism when responding to the alleged whipping incident by the Border Patrol agents who report to you. When in fact, on October 22nd, 2022, it was reported that 2.5 hours before that press conference, Marcia Espinoza, Assistant Secretary of DHS Public Affairs, emailed you and CC'd other DHS leadership, alerting you all that the photographer who took the images did not see any whipping occur, invalidating the initial claim. And it wasn't until May of this year that you corrected the record to say, well, let me just correct you right there because actually the investigation concluded the whipping did not occur. Don Rosenberg, in this very room, testified a few weeks ago that you lie. It is a perpetual pattern, and the fact is there are real people that are impacted by that. We have now had, since you testified, we have had something like 200 people a day dying from fentanyl deaths, which would amount to 90,000 people. I showed you before, when you were here, the lost voices of fentanyl, the hundreds, the thousands of Americans that continue to die, 90,000 since you came into this committee and lied to us saying we have operational control. I yield back.